The son just wanted his father, but he only realized it when it was almost too late. It was nearly midnight when Daniel unlocked the penthouse door with his keycard. The hallway light flicked on coldly. The silence was as heavy as the fog clouding his mind after another international flight. He unbuttoned his dress shirt collar, loosened the silk Italian tie, and dropped his leather briefcase on the console. All he wanted was silence. A sip of whiskey, 5 minutes of nothing. But before he could take 2 steps into the living room, a firm hand grabbed his arm. Another one covered his mouth. His body instinctively tensed, but the voice that whispered into his ear was familiar. Shaky, but familiar. "Don't scream. Please, don't wake the boy." It was Marta, the newly hired housekeeper, still wearing her blue uniform at that late hour. Her eyes red and swollen, her face pale as paper. "What the hell is going on?" Daniel whispered back, annoyed. "You scared me." She looked back toward the hallway. "You need to know, Pedro has been walking around the apartment at night, sleepwalking. Ever since you left, it's been happening almost every night." Daniel stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, sir. Tonight." He almost fell down the stairs. Time stopped. The echo of that last word lingered in the air. "Stairs." Marta continued, her voice trembling. "I heard footsteps. Jumped out of bed. He was at the top of the stairs, eyes open but not seeing anything. He kept saying, 'Dad, Dad, where are you?' If I hadn't run..." She stopped, bit her lips, avoided Daniel's eyes. He rubbed his face, stunned. "Why didn't you call me?" "I did, sir. 4 times. Your phone was off. I even tried the company's secretary." Daniel felt the ground fall out from under him. It was true. His phone had been off since the flight. The secretary? He couldn't even remember the last time he'd heard her voice. He was always jumping from meeting to meeting. "Is he okay now?" he finally asked, not sure what to feel. "He's sleeping, but it's not the first time." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Marta looked him in the eyes, for the first time since she started working there. "With all due respect, sir, I wasn't sure you really cared." The sentence hit like a slap. Cold, raw, impossible to deny. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He just stared at the marble floor, where his expensive Italian shoes now looked completely out of place. Suddenly, everything in the apartment felt too much. The overpriced artwork, the oppressive silence, the emptiness. Marta stepped back. "Good night, sir, excuse me." She walked to the guest room and gently closed the door. Daniel stood there, alone, in the middle of the softly lit hallway. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than usual. The whiskey was forgotten, the bed unreachable. In that moment, he realized something simple, yet profound. He barely knew his own son. How many nightmares had Pedro endured while he flew business class to close deals? How many sleepless nights had Marta spent running through hallways that should have been guarded by a father, not by an employee? He walked slowly toward Pedro's room. The door was slightly ajar. A rocket-shaped nightlight cast a bluish hue across the room. The boy was curled up hugging a worn-out teddy bear Daniel didn't even remember existed. Beside the bed, a small table with a glass of water and 2 poorly colored drawings. One of them showed a tall figure in a tie waving goodbye to a smaller figure with a backpack. Above, crooked letters, "When's Daddy coming back?" Daniel felt his heart tighten, as if something old and forgotten inside him was trying to wake up. He quietly pulled out the desk chair and sat. Just watched his son sleep. How many days had passed since their last dinner together, since they'd talked, even about something trivial? He couldn't remember. All he knew was that next month's schedule was packed, and so was the one after that. What if Pedro had fallen down the stairs? What if Marta hadn't been awake? A silent tragedy could have happened, and once again, he wouldn't have been there. The clock on the wall read 12:42 a.m. For the first time in years, Daniel turned his phone completely off. He pushed the chair back and laid down on the floor beside his son's bed. Not for comfort, but out of guilt, out of forgotten love, out of shame, out of awakening. His eyes didn't close, but for the first time he chose not to run. Dawn was just breaking when Daniel stirred to the sound of the electric kettle in the kitchen. He had spent the night on the floor of his son's room. He hadn't really slept. He had spent the whole night watching Pedro's tiny movements, taking deep breaths every time the boy stirred and mumbled nonsense. As he got up, his back ached from the makeshift bed. He straightened his wrinkled shirt collar and went to the kitchen, where Marta was quietly setting the table. She didn't say a word, just slid a cup of coffee toward him as if to say, "Drink first, talk later." "Thanks," he murmured, sitting down. The coffee was hot and strong, just the way he liked it. Just the way he didn't remember having it at home for a long time. "He slept through the night," he commented. "After I went to his room, nothing else happened." Marta nodded but didn't show any emotion. "Sometimes that's all they need," she replied, "for their dad to be there." Daniel remained silent, stirring his coffee. His pride tried to find an argument, but his heart knew she was right. Trying to fix something like gluing shattered glass with tape, he pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm gonna send him a new bike. Top-of-the-line model, with balance sensors and GPS. He'll love it." Marta stopped cutting the bread and looked at him for the first time. "Mr. Daniel, I'm sorry, but he doesn't need a bike." "What?" "Every kid likes bikes. It's just, he needs you." The words fell like a stone into a deep well. No echo, no softness. "I'm not trying to overstep," she continued, "but you asked what he needs, and, well, it's not something you can buy." Daniel took a deep breath. He was a businessman, a man of solutions. Money had always been the most efficient shortcut, but now, standing before this simple woman in a worn uniform and tired eyes, he felt powerless. "Where is he now?" "In his room, waking up slowly. I let him sleep in on days when he has those night episodes." Daniel got up and walked to Pedro's room. He knocked softly before entering. "Son?" Pedro was sitting on the bed, eyes puffy from sleep, hair messy. When he saw his father, he looked surprised. "You really came back," he murmured as if in disbelief. "I did," Daniel said, trying to smile. "And I'm staying today, okay?" Pedro nodded with a small, shy smile. A tiny gesture, but loaded with meaning. During breakfast, Daniel tried to start a conversation. "Still into dinosaurs? Or have you grown up into a soccer fan now?" Pedro shrugged. "I still like both. Can I check out your toys later? Maybe we can build a dinosaur together." The boy hesitated, then nodded. Something was broken, a bond that once existed but had been stretched, corroded, nearly snapped. Now, as it was being pulled again, no one knew if it would break or withstand the tension. The rest of the morning passed awkwardly. Daniel was physically present but felt like a visitor in a home that once was his. He tried to find moments of connection, but everything felt forced. Pedro responded with one word, 2 smiles, timid glances. Marta, in the background, quietly observed everything. It was as if she had been there for years, knowing not just every corner of the house, but every corner of that boy's soul. And now, silently, she was offering her boss a chance to enter too. After lunch, Pedro went upstairs to his room. Daniel stayed in the living room, staring at an old picture frame. Him and Pedro at the beach when the boy was 3, both smiling. He didn't remember that day. He remembered the meeting he had to reschedule to be there, the traffic stress, but not the boy's laughter, not the sand, not the smell of sunscreen. "Mr. Daniel?" Marta appeared, holding something in her hands, a small cardboard box, childishly decorated. "I found this under his bed the other day. I thought you should see it." He opened it slowly. Inside were several folded pages, some with drawings, others with notes written in childish handwriting. One read, "Dad, I did good in school today. I wanted to tell you, but the lady said you traveled again. It's okay. I'll tell you later." Another showed a picture of his dad with a huge suitcase and Pedro with a speech bubble. "Come back soon." And the one that hurt the most, "When I grow up, I want to be your friend." Daniel closed his eyes. His throat burned. What he felt wasn't guilt. It was absence, It was the space he had let grow between himself and his son without realizing it. He climbed the stairs slowly, found Pedro lying on his bed, flipping through a dinosaur book. "Son," he said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Can I tell you something?" Pedro nodded. "I used to think that working hard was how I took care of you, that giving you a nice house, cool toys, trips, that's what a dad was supposed to do. It's not. Maybe. But it's not enough. And it took me too long to realize that. I'm sorry." Pedro didn't respond, just looked at him. A long look, as if trying to figure out whether this man was the same as before, or someone new. Then, he laid his head in his father's lap, and stayed there. In that moment, Daniel knew words weren't enough, that he'd have to rebuild everything with presence, consistency, unrushed love. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time. That Monday, for the first time in years, Daniel's name didn't show up in the 8 a.m. video call, nor in the 10 a.m. meetings, nor in the afternoon's urgent calls. The CEO was absent, not because of failure, but by choice. Pedro woke up to the smell of breakfast coming from the kitchen. Pancakes, honey, and fruit, the same menu he used to ask for during trips with his mom, back before everything changed. As he came down the stairs, he was surprised to see his father in a t-shirt, slippers, and a crooked apron, completely out of place in the luxurious penthouse setting. "Morning, champ," Daniel said, trying to sound natural. "Today is ours. Just ours." Pedro hesitated before replying. "Is Marta sick?" "No, she's just resting. I asked her to give us this moment, just the two of us. How about that?" The boy slowly nodded, sat down. Ate in silence. Every bite felt like a test, every gesture from his father a question. Is he really here? Or is this just another mirage? Daniel was trying, really trying, telling stories from his own childhood, asking about games, cracking bad jokes, but every word seemed to bounce off an invisible wall between them. After breakfast, they started putting together a dinosaur puzzle. Daniel got pieces wrong, laughed too loud, forced enthusiasm. Pedro smiled politely, but kept his distance. It was as if he had learned to protect himself from disappointment. By late morning, exhausted and frustrated, Daniel stepped out onto the balcony for air. Marta found him there, holding a coffee cup with both hands, his gaze lost in the city. "I'm trying, Marta, but he doesn't seem to trust me, like he thinks I'll just disappear again." She walked up calmly. "Didn't you?" The question held no accusation, just truth, and it stung. "He learned to manage on his own, sir, or at least to shield himself from your absence. It takes time for a child to unlearn that. I wish I could fix everything at once." "You can't fix absence in a hurry." Daniel nodded silently, then turned to her. "You have kids, don't you?" "Two, a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. They live with my sister back in the countryside. I see them on weekends when I can." Daniel furrowed his brow, surprised. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you never asked." He swallowed hard. "And why? Why did you stay here night after night, waking up with my son, taking care of him, when you could have been with your own?" "Because he needed someone, and because I know what it's like to fall asleep, waiting for someone who doesn't come home." Her answer was firm, but there was no resentment, only old pain, and a compassion Daniel couldn't explain. "You gave up your kids to care for mine." "No, I just tried to give yours what mine also miss. Presence, even if it's not perfect." Silence. "I want to help bring your kids closer," Daniel said suddenly. "Find a good school for them, a place for you all to live. We'll figure it out. It's not fair." "With all due respect, sir," Marta interrupted, "this isn't about fairness, it's about choice. And if you truly want to help, start by staying here, every day, before saving others, save your son." She walked away, leaving Daniel standing there, small beneath the weight of everything he was feeling. That afternoon, he decided not to force anything. He let Pedro play alone, staying nearby, sat on the couch, read a book, just existed, a steady presence, No promises, no pressure. Then Pedro appeared, holding a small notepad. "Dad, can I show you something?" "Of course, son. What is it?" It was a sketchbook, colorful doodles, superheroes, monsters, and letters. Lots of letters, similar to the ones in the box under his bed, but these were newer, more recent. "I made these when you were traveling. Sometimes Marta helped me write them." One read, "Dad, if you can't come to my birthday, it's okay. I'll pretend you were there." Another, "I got a medal in swimming today. I think you would have liked seeing it." And one that shattered him. "I don't know if you remember me anymore, but I'm Pedro." Daniel closed the notebook. His eyes welled up, and he pulled his son close. For the first time, without words, Pedro hugged him back. A long hug. Hesitant at first, then firm. Strong. Necessary. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered. "I'm here now, and I'm going to stay. Every day. All the time." Pedro said nothing. But in that hug, Daniel knew the rebuilding had begun, not of the past, but of the future. That evening, Marta watched father and son playing a board game in the living room. They laughed, argued over the rules, pretended not to know how to play. She smiled quietly, holding her phone with a message from her sister. "The kids miss you. When are you coming?" Marta looked at Daniel, then at Pedro, and replied, "Soon. God is putting everything in place." If someone walked into that apartment today, they might not recognize the space, not because of the furniture, still modern, elegant, carefully curated by decorators, not because of the art on the walls, still neutral and silent, but because something in the air had changed, the sound of children's laughter, the smell of popcorn, the presence of life. It was Friday night, which now meant movie night at home. A new tradition, but already expected. Pedro sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around his feet, navigating the TV menu like a Hollywood director. Next to him, Daniel, wearing an oversized t-shirt, a bowl of popcorn balanced on his knees, and beside him, quietly, Marta, no longer in uniform, just a simple blouse and jeans, like part of the family she had become. "If you pick that robot one again, I'm falling asleep in the first 5 minutes," Daniel teased. "But this one has a sequel now, and they have a flying dog this time," Pedro argued, excited. Marta giggled softly. "I'll go make some juice." "No way," Daniel interrupted. "Tonight's my turn. You relax. Go check on your kids. The pizza's coming in 20 minutes. She hesitated, still not used to the role reversal, but obeyed with a shy smile. 3 weeks ago, Daniel had done the unthinkable. He used his connections to help Marta transfer her kids to a good nearby school and rented a small apartment for her in the same building. He agreed to pay the rent until she was financially stable. He even offered to help her finish her education if she wanted, and she did. "I'm not doing this out of charity," he told her. "I'm doing it because you held together the most important part of my life when I wasn't around. If I have my son back today, it's because of you." And he meant every word. The changes weren't fast, but they were real. Daniel restructured the company, delegated more, hired an operations manager. His phone, once an extension of his hand, now spent more time on silent than buzzing. Business dinners gave way to homework nights, dominoes, and silly bedtime stories. At first, many colleagues doubted Daniel's new phase, but he didn't care. He had learned in the hardest way possible that no amount of success could make up for being absent when your child needed you most. That movie night, as the credits rolled and Pedro fell asleep with his head on his father's lap, Marta returned quietly. "He's out?" "Fast asleep." Daniel gently stroked the boy's hair. "He hasn't had another episode since that night," Marta said, almost like she was sharing a blessing. "I know. I think he feels safe now." They looked at each other. A silence of gratitude filled the room. "You don't seem like the same man who walked in that day," Marta said, almost as a statement. "I don't feel like him either." He took a deep breath. "Sometimes I think I woke up too late, but now that I'm awake, I don't want to fall asleep again." She nodded, visibly moved. "You know what my son told me yesterday?" she asked. "He said, Uncle Daniel is the only grown-up who knows how to play barefoot. I think that's the highest compliment someone can get. Daniel laughed, eyes misty. Tell me that's not better than a year-end bonus. It is. Worth a lot more. The clock read 9:47 p.m. Daniel gently lifted Pedro in his arms and carried him to his room, laid him down, fixed his pillow, tucked him in with the dinosaur blanket, and watched him sleep for a few minutes. The room now had new drawings on the walls. One showed 3 figures holding hands, a boy, a tall man in a tie, and a woman with her hair tied back. Above the drawing, large letters read, "Now my house has hugs." Daniel stepped out of the room, heart so full it almost hurt. In the living room, Marta was already picking up the pillows. "Marta," he called gently, "I think it's time we change something." She furrowed her brows, confused. "Starting tomorrow, you're no longer the employee. I want you to be an official part of our home. Not by contract, but by choice." She opened her mouth, stunned. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just accept it. You're family, Marta." And there, on an ordinary night, in the middle of a messy living room and the smell of cold popcorn, something greater than redemption was born. A home. Not built with bricks, not surrounded by luxury, but rooted in presence, affection, and redemption. Even asleep, Pedro smiled in his dreams. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, knew for sure there was nothing out there more important than what he now had right here. If this story touched you in any way, tell me in the comments, who was there for you when you needed it most? Your story might touch someone else's heart too. And if you believe more people should hear this, leave a like and subscribe. Not for the numbers, but because stories like this deserve to be shared.